Welcome back, everybody, to The Great Compromise. Of course, I am GOP Jim, and with me is Victoria the Democrat. And today we're talking about, or rather learning about, Roe v. Wade. And I'm sure everyone has heard a little bit, at least, about Roe v. Wade in the past week, as it has been an interesting week, to say the least. If you want to know what our opinions on abortion are, we did a debate episode on it earlier. It was one of our first episodes, so I encourage you all to go back and listen to that if you are interested in our stances. But for now, let's talk about Roe v. Wade. So what is Roe v. Wade? It's the name of the lawsuit that led to the landmark 1973 U.S. Supreme Court decision establishing a constitutional right to abortion in the United States. The majority opinion found an absolute right to abortion during the first trimester of pregnancy. So what happened this past week? For those who do not know, there was a leak this past week from inside the Supreme Court. A draft opinion from Justice Alito on overturning Roe v. Wade came out way before it should have. And so now here we are talking about it. For those of you who did not listen to our original abortion debate episode, I am pro-life and Victoria is pro-choice. And so, Victoria, how do you feel about what has happened at the Supreme Court?
I'm not happy. Obviously, I think Roe v. Wade is a really good thing, and I hope that we keep it in place and that abortion remains a constitutional right. But I also think it's crazy that there was a leak at the Supreme Court, and that's never even happened before. So I have a lot of questions about how that even happened, or why, or if that was somewhat on purpose.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like, the Supreme Court almost never leaks. Like, it technically has before, but, like, nothing to this degree or to this scale, right? So, like, this is bad. The fact that it's an early draft, first of all, those are subject to change and have time to change. So to me, like, whoever leaked it, their goal probably was to have public opinion try to influence the judges, right? And that makes me feel gross. Like, that's not how we want this country to function.
That's very shady business.
Right,
Yeah.
it's shady. And it's really underhanded, and so, I mean, I know that whoever leaked this will be caught, and so we'll see. You know, time will tell who leaked it. I am very interested.
I mean, I have to assume that it's someone that didn't want it overturned, right? That leaked it to try and, like, get the outrage from the left in order to, like, show how bad the reaction would be and give them a chance to save it.
Yeah, that's my assumption, too.
But that's still, like, wildly unethical.
Yes, I'm glad you said that. Thank you. Yeah.
I still believe in the courts.
Well,
like...
okay. A lot of people, well, full disclosure, I've been reading online a lot, you know, the reaction about this, and, like, the reaction from the left is that they don't care about the leak. They care about the substance of the leak. And so, you know, I appreciate you saying that.
So the concern is that if Roe v. Wade is overturned, it's not protected at all. Like, abortion is not a constitutional right anymore, and that goes down into the states to be decided on, like, a state law basis instead of a federal right.
Correct, yeah.
And so a lot of states are already making moves towards, like, limiting the protections on abortion. So, like, Texas would definitely make it completely illegal if it was overturned.
Yeah, I think there's something called trigger laws in place where if and when Roe v. Wade goes away, that these states would automatically have abortion become illegal. And there's 13 states that have that right now. Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, both Dakotas, Missouri, Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, and Louisiana. And so this is how it was before Roe v. Wade in the first place. Abortion was, you know, legal on a state-by-state basis. It wasn't legal under federal law. And so it would bring it back to how it was before.
Right, so let's look at that. In 1973, Roe v. Wade was made a law. So for the last 49 years, abortion has been a constitutional right. Before it was made a constitutional right, it was obtained through dangerous and expensive matters. Often people left their state to find abortion options. Those who wished to get an abortion commonly performed it on themselves or without a doctor present. This sometimes led to death or permanent injury. Before Roe v. Wade, abortion was legal in 4 states, while 16 more permitted it under specific circumstance, meaning that 30 states made it completely illegal, and that was nullified once abortion became a right in 1973. And, like we mentioned, it was made a right by a conservative-leaning Supreme Court, which allowed women to obtain abortions during the first trimester of the pregnancy, and then states have then been able to regulate what happens during the second and third trimester, depending on procedure and circumstance.
Yeah, no, this is a heavy subject, obviously. And we often hear that, banning abortion doesn't stop it. It only stops unsafe abortions or something.
It stops safe abortions.
It stops safe
right.
abortions, excuse me. I can't speak to that, but that is something we definitely hear. I did a little research about the number of deaths from abortions before Roe v. Wade, because I was just curious, because I always heard that, like, women were dying, and back alley abortions is dangerous, it's a horrible thing. And so I had to do a little research myself, and so the number of deaths from abortions has been trending downwards since the 1960s. That's quite a while before Roe v. Wade. In fact, in 1972... Sorry, go ahead.
Like 3 years before Roe v. Wade, not quite a while.
From the 1960s. Well, this is 1972, the year before Roe. The number of deaths in the United States from legal abortions was 24, and from illegal abortions, 39, and that's according to the CDC. And in 1965, that number was 200, and so that, obviously, those numbers are down quite a bit from the 60s. And so Mary Steichen Calderon, the at-time medical director of Planned Parenthood, attributed the decline in the mortality rate to antibiotics and the fact that 90% of illegal abortions were done by trained physicians. So I would argue that the deaths from abortions went down due to advancements in medicine and technology, not because it became legal in 1973. It was already trending downwards. And there are still deaths from abortion today. It is a dangerous procedure, legal or not. And Roe v. Wade didn't have much to do with making abortion safer, in my opinion.
Okay. I mean, I disagree, but I respect your opinion.
Okay. I'm just looking at the numbers, and they were already going down, and it didn't seem Roe had an effect on them at all, frankly. It just seemed like technology and antibiotics probably did more so.
I think something that we need to remember is that abortion being a constitutional right in the U.S. means that we allow for international aid to be sent to countries who can then regulate the money to, like, female clinics and stuff like that, right? So whenever the U.S. has a Republican president who doesn't believe in abortion, like, that even impacts the federal, like, grant money that goes to other countries. And then women in, like, the, like, Himalayas that just need birth control so that they don't have, 12 kids because they don't have, like, the access to healthcare or education like we have here.
Right.
No longer get that right because they don't have the funding from America anymore. So, like, there's, yes, like, medical advancements in the US, but there's still such a trickle-down effect for, like, the rest of the world because we are such a leading power.
That's interesting. I personally don't think we should be funding abortions overseas.
I'm not even talking about abortions overseas.
I know.
I'm talking about birth control and, like, health checks.
Right, and I don't see why that can't continue, even though Roe is gone.
It doesn't, though.
Well, then that's a problem we can both agree to, right? Like, that we can still fund contraceptives and education and birth control overseas if we need to, but we can do that without funding abortion, certainly.
The problem is that it takes place in the same places, right? Like, the place where we can access health, like Planned Parenthood in the US, is, like, vilified for giving abortions when that's a small amount of the procedures that they even do, right? Like, they do free checkups on impoverished women without health care. That doesn't mean that, like, they're doing abortions left and right, day in and day out.
Right.
Right, but there's still that association. And so that takes place overseas as well. And the book The Moment of Lift by Melinda Frenchgate, like, really dives into that, like, specifically about how there's like this condemnation of even like teaching healthcare and like sex education to women because like it's all so dirty, which I think like we really need to work to educate people against that, and having like these open conversations is all important. And I feel like that kind of gets encapsulated of like the trickle down effect of like whether or not this is illegal and like criminalized as a procedure.
I guess we can talk about Planned Parenthood for a second. You brought them up. They do get federal money, right? Because they do good. Like they help women in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And so they get federal funding, and they're not, allowed to use that federal funding towards abortions. And so, whether or not they do is the ethical question, right? If it keeps the lights on, or is it in a way funding abortion? And so I guess that is the question if we're funding these places overseas. So I can see maybe why that's been a problem, but I think you and I agree that, we should still be helping these women get contraceptives and education, and it shouldn't be a dirty conversation, right?
Right. Yeah, definitely.
So bringing it back to the present for a moment, Roe v. Wade going away would leave the choice up to the states. And that, leaving it up to the states, is how this country works for the most part, right? I can give you an example. Medicaid eligibility is different in every state. And that provides health care to those who need it most. And I would argue that it's a far more important benefit than abortion is, and no one is saying that power should be taken away from the states. So, to me, this kind of makes sense, right? Leave it up to the individual states. The voters have more power in local and state elections anyways, and so their voice is more likely to be heard on this specific issue, which is what people want anyways, and to me it just makes sense. What do you think?
I don't think it makes sense, because it should be a right that someone gets to decide what happens to their own body and their own health. So for that to be like not just no questions asked right across the country just seems really wrong to me. Like you're taking power away and like autonomy away from women.
Well,
I know that's not how you feel, and I know that's not the debate that we're having, right? Like this is a learning about the consequences, but I just feel like this shouldn't be something that we have to vote on. It should just be without question a right that people have.
Okay. Yeah, we definitely disagree on that, but why don't we hear what Democratic leadership has to say on the matter? Let's start with the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She wrote, "Such modest measures, instead of the sweeping policy laid out in Roe, might have prevented the rancor surrounding abortion rights that has been so much a part of the post-Roe politics." She suggested in 1984, and again in 1992, that the court should have given state legislatures limited guidance and allowed them to work out new policies, as she claimed they were doing before Roe interrupted their work. How do you feel about what Ruth Bader Ginsburg had to say about Roe v. Wade?
I also have a quote from Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Oh, interesting. Let's hear it.
She says, "The decision whether or not to bear a child is central to a woman's life, to her well-being and her dignity. When the government controls that decision for her, she is being treated as less than a full adult human responsible for their own choices."
That's interesting. Perhaps that was her personal opinion, and the quote I had was her legal opinion. Or maybe she changed her mind. I don't know. But I find that interesting
that we're quoting the exact same person.
We're both quoting Ruth Bader Ginsburg. How about Joe Biden in 1974 when he was a senator and he was asked about Roe v. Wade? He said, "I don't like the Supreme Court decision on abortion. I think it went too far. I don't think that a woman has the sole right to say about what should happen to her body." And then, in 1982, he voted for an amendment that would have allowed individual states to overturn Roe. I find that very interesting.
I think I'm too angry to speak.
Yeah, that would be current president and former Senator Joe Biden.
Let's focus on what people are concerned will take place if Roe v. Wade is overturned.
Sure.
So, like we talked about, people are worried that banning abortion really only bans safe abortions. But people are also concerned that this will lead to investigation and suspicion following miscarriages that are completely innocent and devastating, that it will mean that every loss of pregnancy could be suspected of being the result of a legal abortion. And just like with everything else that's illegal, like then there's blame placed on someone that just like it just happened. It wasn't a choice, right? So that will become like a more focused issue. People are also worried that just like with anything else that's illegal, money buys silence and exception. So really, the rich will still have access to abortions, while the impoverished, who utilize things like Planned Parenthood and other healthcare clinics, will be forced to find unsafe options. Instead of banning abortions, what I really think needs to happen is we need to go upstream, right? We're supporting pregnant women who need housing, food, childcare, employment, education, and help paying for their medical care and birth expenses. Like these are many of the reasons why people get abortions in the first place. So if we help to support that, then do you think abortion become less of a hot button topic?
Of course, yeah, we should be providing education and better access to contraceptives and improving the adoption and foster care systems. We need to be doing all of that, whether abortion's legal or not. That is just, it's important across the board. I want to talk about what you brought up first, the criminalizing miscarriages. That, to me, is a slippery slope argument. It wasn't a thing before Roe v. Wade, and it won't be a thing after Roe v. Wade. No one blames a woman for having a miscarriage. It's nobody's fault. It's not ever going to be illegal. It wasn't before, and it won't be now. And so,
to clarify, I didn't say that miscarriages will be illegal. That's out of anyone's control. But that it won't be believed that it was a miscarriage, and there's like questions and looking into the situation.
Okay. It wasn't a thing before Roe. It likely won't be a thing after Roe.
All I'm saying is what I've researched and what people are concerned about.
No, I've heard those concerns, and I think it's a slippery slope argument. I don't think it's a legitimate one, personally. I think it's important people know that there are services and organizations to help mothers out there. For example, there are several federal programs to help pregnant women. The Women, Infants, and Children program offers nutritional food and education. You can also get some screening services with referrals to other agencies. Or how about Medicaid? That's a state-administered program that allows you to obtain important health services, especially during pregnancy. Or the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program that gives financial aid to purchase food, clothing, housing, utilities, or medical supplies. And how about SNAP, or aka food stamps, or Section 8 housing? This isn't even a complete list of the government programs that help struggling mothers, and there are countless private charities that will assist as well. Actually, there are around 2,500 pregnancy resource centers in America, and these centers offer to help women with free pregnancy tests, ultrasounds, testing for STIs, and counseling. In addition, pregnant women are offered resources such as maternity clothes, diapers, and parenting classes. So there are a lot of options to help mothers, and I just wanted to mention these so people are aware. I feel like I hear a lot like there's no help, and I wasn't aware of all the help that's available too, and so I just wanted to put that out there today.
Yes, those programs like TANF do exist, and those are good. However, as a case manager, I saw the limitations that those programs had, and the money isn't always enough. Childcare can be hard to find, but you need to be employed to qualify for a lot of these programs. But at the same time, you can't make too much or else you get kicked off. So while it's great that these programs do exist, just because they exist doesn't mean that women should lose their right to advocate for themselves and what happens to their own bodies.
You know, we disagree on that last point, but fair enough. I had just learned about these programs when I was doing research for this, and I was like, surprised there was so much. But of course, you know, the federal government, there's always downsides to these things, and so that is probably much more realistic.
I wish they always worked as well as they look like they should on paper, right? Like it sounds great.
Yeah.
But it can disappoint just like all the other programs out there.
Every other government program. Yeah. Of course. That makes sense.
So I guess to circle back to where we started, is Roe vs. Wade unconstitutional?
I guess
I mean, Alito says it is, right?
Right, well, it seems to me like the initial Roe v. Wade decision was like the justices were creating policy and or like legislation for the country, right? And that's not their job. They don't write legislation, they just interpret. So to me, it felt like that's what Roe v. Wade was, and so getting rid of it is like undoing that mistake. That's at least my opinion. And it seems to be what Justice Alito was saying.
And, you know, I'll admit I don't have a perfect memorized recall of the Constitution as it stands
What?
and
You
how it was
don't?
created. I know it's one of my fatal flaws, but I think that even if that's not in the Constitution, it should still be a protected right. Like, there are so many things from the past that we've worked on and improved today, right? Like, you can't physically like harass and rape your wife anymore. Like, that used to be okay, and like, you know, not until like the 1970s was that made a law to protect women from even, you know, being hurt by their husbands and stuff. So I think like there's certain stuff that we've made progress on. Like in 1973, we took homosexuality out of the American Psychological Association as like a mental illness like diagnoses, which it's not. So like
Right.
these are important progress that we've made as like time goes on, and we shouldn't go back. And I feel like Roe v. Wade is along those lines.
Well, while we're talking about like overturning precedents, do you recognize the name Brown versus the Board of Education? That was allowing to desegregate schools, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a precedent that was overturned by the Supreme Court. And I should hope everyone would argue that that was a good precedent to overturn. And so this isn't the first time a major precedent has been overturned, a huge change in this country. And so I would also argue that society evolves and ideas change and old precedents get overturned, and as they should. And so that's at least my argument for it.
Do you have any concerns about this being overturned and like the ramifications from this? I guess like from your side, are there any risks or downsides?
It goes back to the states, right? State legislatures get to decide if it's legal or not. In my opinion, I think that gives the people more of a voice in this issue, which is how more issues should be handled. People always say you don't get much of a vote in the presidential elections, or you don't get much of a vote, for Congress and Senate, but your vote matters more in local and state elections. And so, for the people who want this to be legal, they can vote, and the people who want it to be illegal, they can vote for their candidates. And I think it's going to be better in the long run, keeping it to the state level.
Do you have any concerns about those people that need this procedure or desperately are trying to choose it in a state where it's illegal?
Do I have any concerns?
Right. Like, do you think that is it really not going to make a huge impact because they'll just cross state lines, or it could lead to unsafe procedures that are not, you know, medically supervised by like a professional?
Ideally, I don't want anyone to have to get an abortion. But if they truly have to, then yes, cross state lines and go to a state that allows it.
And that might be just what becomes more common, right?
It was
like,
before Roe, and I think we're getting back to that. Well,
yeah.
It seems like we'll be getting back to that. Technically, this hasn't even happened yet.
I know, like, I think a lot of people are getting really worked up and concerned about the ramifications, but it was just a leak. Like, we just don't know.
Right. Well, people are protesting at the houses of these Supreme Court justices, which I think is a little too far.
Not okay.
Yeah.
Like, people still deserve to feel safe in their own homes.
Right. Like, I'm fine with protests. Go to the Supreme Court building itself. Don't go to their homes. Please. Please do not harass these people.
That's never okay.
No. And that's something we can agree on.
There we are. Thank thank you for listening to this episode of the Great Compromise podcast. We appreciate you taking the time to share this with all of your friends. I mean, like all of them. People you haven't talked to for a year. Send them the podcast. It'll be a great way to reunite. And then follow us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. You know the deal. You're probably already following us, right? All right. See you next time.